Welcome to Rates and Barrels, presented by Topps. Check out Topps Project 70, celebrating 70 years of Topps baseball cards. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you on this Monday. It is September 13th, just a few weeks to go before we reach the postseason. On this episode, we will discuss Max Scherzer's achievement, a 3,000 strikeout career and counting after a near-perfect game against the Padres on Sunday. That was on the heels of Corbin Burnes and Josh Hader combining for a no-hitter in Cleveland over the weekend. So we will try and find the next Corbin Burnes because, you know, this one's cool, but let's try and find the next one because that's a lot of fun.
And we're going to get really angry about pulling the guy out of a no-hitter.
We should get really mad about that.
That's a different podcast. You're looking for a different podcast.
I think you're looking for a podcast that doesn't normally talk about baseball, that parachutes in to talk about baseball for 2 minutes and then goes back to talking about football. I think that's where you're going to find that take most commonly.
Yeah, maybe run by a Bayless.
Yeah, some guy named Bayless. His brother's cool, though.
I know. Actually, I thought of his brother's name first. That's why I just did it last name, because I forgot which one was which for a second.
Rick good, Skip bad.
That's right. Rick, I watched a ton of Top Chef back in the day, and he was usually on the Masters, and it looked like he made pretty good food.
Oh yeah,
I would eat it. I don't think I've been at a restaurant of his though.
No, a lot of Chicago-based stuff. I've had his Frontera Grill, I think is the name of his restaurant. He has a torta stand in O'Hare.
Oh, that's right. I have had that, and I enjoyed
really
it.
Good.
Yeah, the torta was good. Yeah.
It's a really good airport sandwich. I mean, it's a sandwich. Okay, here's how I would describe it. It's a sandwich that I would go get anyway if I wasn't at the airport. That's how good it is, which is
pretty
high
rare
praise.
Yeah, the airport. Don't
usually find that there. So check that out if you get stuck in Terminal E, maybe in O'Hare. I was actually on my way to San Francisco last time I had one, so it was pretty great. I think the churros that he made last time I saw him on TV, those have inspired me. I'm going to make some pumpkin churros now that it's fall, even though it doesn't feel like fall.
Pumpkin everything, yay.
Do you like pumpkins?
I'm fine, but then it's in the beer, and it's in the coffee, and it's in the tea, and it's a bit much.
It's a little bit of a takeover. Yeah, pumpkin bagels, pumpkin cream cheese.
Oh, God.
Pumpkin
No,
applesauce,
stop. God, please.
Pumpkin pulled pork.
What? Is that a real thing you just said?
I could probably make a recipe for it.
Probably could do that.
You know who'd make it? Our friend Jason Collette would make it.
He loves everything pumpkin.
He's probably already thrown some pumpkin spice into a.
That's true.
Rub.
I've seen him doing some tweets about pumpkin beer. You know, because there's this whole thing in beer where there's seasonal creep, and so it used to be that the pumpkin beers came out in actual fall. And now the Oktoberfest beers are out in July, and the pumpkin beers are out in August, and so
you got to be first. Sort of like releasing a print magazine for fantasy. You start off, you're like, well, we'd like to get all the signings and stuff right before spring training, and we'll release it like when spring training begins. Then someone does it earlier, and then someone else does it earlier, and all of a sudden you're releasing your magazine
December,
before Christmas. Like, well, let's be first, and
it's actually annoying. The industry trend of that versus the industry trend of signing players later has combined just to annoy me.
I've had some angry Januaries in years past as a result of print deadlines. Print stuff is fun, though. It's old, but it's fun. I would actually say I'd rather do it than not do it if I had the choice, which is a big commitment. But
there's something cool, too, about edification, like sort of putting your takes down in a place that, it's like chiseling it in stone, kind of. So you like go back and look and be like, ooh, yikes. You really liked Alan Webster, huh?
Yeah, my memory is good for some of those, and I'm not shy about like bringing up, oh, yeah, I was totally wrong about that. But to have it all there to review is even better because you can find out how much worse you actually are than you even thought. But let's get to some positive things. We've got Max Scherzer hitting that 3,000 strikeout milestone on Sunday. Another great piece from Britt about Max on The Athletic, so be sure to check that out. It was nearly a perfect game against the Padres, too. Scherzer's the 19th pitcher to reach that career milestone. He's got career best ratios for the season right now. He's sitting with a 2.17 ERA and a .82 WHIP. He's never been better in those categories over a full season.
It's a contract year.
It's a contract year, and the dollars just keep ticking up.
That's it, but it could be. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's that. I think that guy pitches like every single pitch could lead him to a new contract because he just wants to destroy everyone and everything all the time. How about a .88 ERA?
That quote about that. There's a quote in that piece. I don't want to ruin it because it's a reason enough to pay for the Athletic. I feel like to read this quote about how competitive Max Scherzer is. But I will tell you, I'm scared talking to him sometimes.
I think everybody's a little scared to talk to him.
I was actually, I can't actually tell the story, but I was pretty sure he was staring at me across the field one time, and it turned out he was.
I think you told part of that story.
Yeah, I can't tell the whole part of that story, but it was pretty hilarious. Yeah, so, I went up to another writer and was like, "Is Max? Is he staring at me from?" And his response was, "It's Max Scherzer. He always looks like that."
Speaking of pumpkins, if I carve a pumpkin this year, maybe I can make a Max Scherzer pumpkin, like different colored candles.
Eyes. Ooh, I like it.
I think I'm gonna pull
with LED, with the power of LED, you might be able to pull it off. I was looking. Max Scherzer kind of found himself in like around 2013, 2014. So I just did a search over that time. And he leads the league in WAR since 2013 started. 51 in Fangraphs WAR to Kershaw's 45, 46. But it's just sort of amazing to me that he's had this. He has so much more volume because Kershaw and DeGrom and Sale are the next three, and he has like 250 more innings pitched than Kershaw over that time frame, and like 500 more innings than DeGrom, and 400 more than Sale. So he's really excellent and been excellent in bulk. A 2.80 ERA since 2013 started, 137 wins. I mean, this is what a Hall of Famer looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. A no-brainer in that regard. At a .88 ERA, a .67 whip, a 37.7% K rate, just a 2.6% walk rate since joining the Dodgers. He actually has accrued more Fangraphs WAR with the Dodgers this season than he did with the Nats, even though he's pitched twice as many innings in D.C. than he has in L.A. so far.
God, what a big game pitcher.
Yeah, this is sort of like the only other acquisition. I mean, there's been plenty of big pitchers that have moved over the last 15, 20 years, but this is similar, I think, to the impact that CC Sabathia had on the Brewers, just in terms of how amazingly good Scherzer has been. I think when you look at Scherzer as a free agent this offseason, yikes. I mean, for a pitcher his age, might get a slightly longer deal than you'd expect. He's at least going to get a massive AAV because he's showing no signs at all of slowing down. And Al asked me on Fantasy Baseball in 15 for Monday, he said, is Scherzer going to maybe be the first pitcher off the board in some 2022 drafts? My lean was no, only because of age. My answer was that we sort of discriminate against older players in our game, and even if he has on paper everything you'd want from someone you would take as the first pitcher off the board, they'll look at the age column and say, yeah, I got to wait a little longer. I'm going to put a couple guys ahead of Scherzer. He'll be top 5, but he won't be number 1 among pitchers going into next season.
There is that whole deal of like you're not injury prone until you are. Like when I've seen players that are like 600. We've talked about this before here, where it's like you see players 5 straight seasons of 600 plate appearances or 650 plate appearances. This guy is rock solid, right? And that's sort of what you look like when you look at Max Scherzer's lines, like all these 200s, right? 220, and just it looks like he's like super health dude. But you can see that he's kind of, fallen back. 2019 was 172 innings. He's had some stints for, the back. This year, he'll probably end up at like 170 innings again. So it might be fair to project him for 170 innings next year, which will take some of the value off of, him compared to a Garrett Cole projection, which will probably have, 180, 190, 200 in it. So I think that'll be the source of the sort of projected difference between the two of them, because maybe by inning, you would say that they were right neck and neck, and maybe you take Scherzer over Cole by inning.
Yeah. I mean, I have no hesitation in taking him in the first 2 rounds again. It's going to cost something early on, first 25 picks or so for sure. I can't see him falling any further than that. regardless of where he goes. He's not going to go to a bad team.
I think he'll be a first rounder, but it's a little bit of an iffy first rounder for me, just because of just the injury risk at a 37-year-old with all these innings. I think the injury risk is there. Think about Verlander, right?
That's exactly the comp,
Verlander
finally crept up a little higher, and it happened to be the year that he broke.
Yeah, and Verlander seemed like a guy who would never get injured, and then he did. But he had the same kind of deal where he had a couple seasons where he had some injuries, he had a surgery, he had a core surgery, like he had some stuff, but he also seemed like he would age really well. And then he had that Tommy John. So I think he'll be a first rounder. I don't think I'll have a lot of shares. I do think on a per inning basis, he deserves to be a first rounder. But I also think that the top of the pitching and the first round of hitting are seem more volatile and uncertain to me than they have in the past.
It's because of a mess of injuries, right? I mean,
yeah.
Tatis's shoulder, Acuna's ACL.
Yeah.
Those two things plus DeGrom's uncertain health.
Exactly.
Mookie Betts coming off of an injury-impacted season. I think he's still a first rounder, as I've said, I think on the fantasy baseball
back end.
Yeah, he'll still be in the top 10 of most leagues, but
then you're going to have some gun-shy owners at back end of the first round too, where they're like, well, didn't we just play this game with Christian Yelich and Cody Bellinger? Rock solid mid-career veteran coming back off of injury years. Are we going to play that game again? So there'll be some that might not take him. I will take Mookie because I don't think that his injury is as disastrous for him. Although, is it similar injury to Christian Yelich? It's a back thing, right? Back and hip.
Yeah, it seems like it's lower for him.
Okay.
I'm not treating these players, so I don't know. But
but anyway, like I Scherzer ahead of DeGrom for me because DeGrom, the injury risk is catastrophic. I mean, it's through the roof.
Right. If you're saying 170 for Scherzer, are you going much higher than 140 or 150 with what you know right now about DeGrom?
No.
So he could slide out of the first round pretty easily. It could end up being maybe back of the top 30 sort of pick.
Yeah, and this whole idea that the GM was saying, that Alderson was saying, like, he had a tear and it fixed itself. That's how these things go. And I'm like, I think that you're not being quite as upfront about what sort of ongoing risk there is for future injury in a situation. Because the way I've heard it with regards to Masahiro Tanaka and Kenta Maeda was that they were basically pitching with a small tear. But, like, that didn't sound like, it just fixed itself. Right? Like, did you ever hear that language about Maeda or Tanaka's? Remember, they were both pitching with like a slight tear of the UCL, right?
Yeah, and no one ever described it. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the episode.
It's healed and it's no longer a problem. Maeda's fine now, or Tanaka's fine now. I'd never heard that language about it. I'd rather be more precise, and maybe we can get like an injury expert on here sometime to talk about these sort of things. But I'd be surprised if it's all just in the rearview mirror for DeGrom. It's like, don't worry about it. It's fixed now.
I mean, it'd be great if it is, but I have a lot of doubts. Just in the organization certainly doesn't help. We've said that time and time.
And then there's a lock solid finding that nothing predicts future injury as much as current injury. Yeah. That's just been shown numbers wise.
So if you're not going to take Scherzer first off the board, you're probably thinking about Garrett Cole or Walker Buehler or maybe even Corbin Burnes. So I believe I saw on the top of Dynasty pitcher rankings, I want to say it was an Eric Cross tweet. I'm sorry if I'm confusing people on Twitter. It was very late last night when I saw this. I just smiled because I saw Corbin Burnes at the top of a list. That's the
that's enough to make you smile.
And I just ran away and I'm like, somebody's got him number one in Dynasty, and I threw the phone down.
That's good enough for me.
I will go to sleep happy today. But Corbin Burnes combined with Josh Hader for a no-hitter against Cleveland over the weekend, and it was obviously the right call to not let him finish it out. This is a team that wants to win the World Series. They need Corbin Burnes healthy to do that. So if you're angry at Craig Counsell today, I'm really sorry. I can't help you. I'm not going to take your side on this one. I think what's really fun here is we've talked about the transformation of Burnes, right? You go back a couple seasons ago, ERA and whip off the charts bad, a four-seamer that was just brutal. You could say similar things about Lucas Giolito a few years ago, too. And with Burnes, we know the pitch mix changed a lot. The cutter has been huge for him. It's a really deep arsenal. He commands everything really well. Giolito is kind of a different path, actually. You might remember them more similarly in your head just because of how bad they were and how good they became. But I look back, 2018 Giolito was a couple of ticks below his current velo. Really wasn't striking many guys out. It wasn't like the guy that missed a ton of bats that had bad ratios. It was just a bad pitcher. He walked too many guys. He didn't strike a lot of guys out. He had 4 pitches at that time, and now he leans more heavily on 3.
He lost the ride on his four seam. He lost the drop on his curveball and slider. He just lost the pitch. What made those pitches good?
Mm-hmm.
So he's the hardest type. Like if we were sitting here to have a segment like finding the next Giolito, I think that would be the hardest because he came back with different pitches, and was like, this is what you saw as a prospect. And we're all like, oh yeah, this is what we saw as a prospect. This pitch has ride now and this pitch has drop now. And I don't know why it didn't, last year. Something's wrong with your mechanics. That's going to be super hard for us to ever predict, right? Because I'm going to predict this guy is going to be a totally different pitcher next year with different pitches. I think the Corbin Burnes one is a little bit easier because for 2 reasons. And this actually, somebody was asking me about this on Twitter. I thought it was an interesting question. I wish I had the handle in front of me, but shout out to whoever asked this question. He said, you said that his home run rate was statistical noise, Corbin Burnes' home run rate that year, right? It was the outlier. It was obvious. We know from research that stuff like home runs allowed and power allowed is the noisiest sort of set of statistics for a hitter or for a pitcher, right? So you're coming from a good statistical standpoint if you say Corbin Burnes would have been better in 2019 just because of statistics, like his home run rate would have regressed. But the person said, well, is that right? Because he had to change his whole pitch mix to get the better home run rate. You know what I'm saying? He changed his true talent. It's almost like the Giolito example.
It's close to the Giolito example. But in some ways, you have to look back even the year before that, too. A .95 home run rate in 38 innings in 2018. The sample is almost the same as the 49 innings.
But that's an argument for statistical regression. I think what's happening is both things are happening, right? Yeah. And so it's really hard to pinpoint. Some of it is statistical regression, where it's just like his home run rate wasn't going to be that bad again. And so that came back. But then he also changed his true talent a little bit. And that's what's really hard about evaluating talent, I think, is sometimes they're making changes that actually change their true talent. And then they're also oscillating around that true talent in terms of having good weeks and bad weeks and good years and bad years around that. I was just looking at Eric Hosmer's WOBA chart, and it is a wild ride.
What brought you there?
Have you realized? Well, I was workshopping this tweet that I ultimately decided was too mean. It was the Padres playoff chances, and then the next picture was that guy Steve Sachs taking his pants off in front of everybody, and then the third picture was Eric Hosmer's seasonal WOBA.
So instead of tweeting that, you just described the tweet on the podcast.
Described it. Well, here it won't be as mean. I guess we're all friends here, and we know that Eno's intent was not to be mean; it was to be funny, and that ultimately he decided it was too mean. So anyway, he goes up and down like a crazy man. It's kind of Hosmer has really good seasons and really bad seasons; just alternates them. So I guess draft Eric Hosmer next year. Anyway, no, he's saying no.
Important to have the YouTube going.
Yeah. Anyway, so we can try to find a Corbin Burnes. The trick, though, is we can do something like sort by worst ERAs and look for good strikeout minus walk rates. That's the sort of statistical way in, right? That's the Corbin Burnes regressed statistically, and that's why he's better. But then what will be sort of taking a leap of faith on is which one of these players will also make the pitch mix change or the strategy change or improve a pitch that they have and actually take that leap. Because there are going to be people on this list who have a 5 ERA right now and a good strikeout minus walk rate that don't conquer their home run issues and end up in the pen. Right? Mm-hmm. That's going to happen for some of these pitchers. So there is a leap of faith where we're going to take a leap of faith. So we can give you some names. You had a name that jumped off this list for you, which is becoming one of your guys, it seems like, early on.
Yeah, Logan Gilbert is probably the young, exciting pitcher that I would look at and say, everything's sort of in place here. And you're looking at a Sierra at 3.73 with an ERA at 5.10. That's the other way. You could look at a Sierra leaderboard, just look at Sierra versus ERA differences. With Gilbert, we've talked about it. It's a deep enough arsenal where he has a few ways to get hitters out. He's missing plenty of bats. He's not walking guys. Like, the core skills are all very good. The home run rate's a tick high right now, 1.32 homers.
Strand rate is low.
Yeah, not in Burnes territory, but a 65.8% LOB percentage. I mean, that's actually really low. So
yeah, 70. The major league average is like 71 or 72.
So he kind of does everything we want a young pitcher to do. And I mentioned a few weeks ago, I thought his ADP was going to track into the 75 to 100 range overall. I don't have the exact date that I made that statement on the podcast. I do know for a fact that Logan Gilbert has been hit several times since I made that statement. So it's going to probably
he has a
be wrong.
5.1 ERA right now. I think he'll be a great. I think he's just dropping and he'll be great.
Yeah, here's this. So I think I said it sometime around August 10th. So it's 6 starts now for Logan Gilbert since I said that. He's got a 27-3 strikeout to walk ratio in 28 innings. That's pretty good. 28 innings and 6 starts isn't very good. But a 7.39 ERA during that span.
Sexy time.
Yeah, it's good. It's good for me as someone who believes in Logan Gilbert. He needs to get knocked around a few more times before the end of the season.
And for, one of the names that pops on this is what I did was just sort by ERA and put K minus BB on the end. So as I'm going down in ERA, I can see a lot of terrible strikeout minus walk rates, people that deserve their fate. Chichi Gonzalez, Carlos Martinez. Sorry, I had to. Those are really low K minus BBs. They probably deserve some of their ERA. Andrew Haney,
mean Eno or mean?
Yeah, Eno. How about Andrew Meany? I wanted to mention Heaney as just an interesting case where here's a guy who's been doing this to us for years. You know what I mean? Like, for years we've looked at the strikeout minus walk rates, and for years we've said, man, he should be better than this. And for years he's given up a lot of homers. So he's, I guess, the cautionary tale. And then here's the name. Brubaker shows up on this list. I thought he had a really great early season. I thought he showed kind of what he could be. Then he kind of fell off and gave up a ton of homers. Has given up 2 homers per 9 this year. I think he's still interesting, but I think he's going to be like back end top 100 or like maybe like 120 for me in pitchers next year, 110 to 120, as in kind of like a good NL only play, deep league play. But I don't think he's going to make my top 75. I just think he doesn't quite have the stuff. He has some okay command. He has a large arsenal, but I think he's missing just a little bit of bite, a little bit of ride. I think there could be he's a location play, and I just think that can be iffy.
Yeah, I think the Heaney one. I mean, there's a similar pitcher to Heaney on this list for me, Eduardo Rodriguez. Like, I keep waiting and waiting and waiting for Eduardo Rodriguez to have the year that he's good. He's probably, over the life of this podcast, which now spans almost 3 seasons, Eduardo Rodriguez might be our most discussed pitcher. And I think Mitch Keller has been the most asked about pitcher. And we've even not answered questions about Mitch Keller on a few occasions and answered a lot of them. And I still keep coming back to Keller as just a general disappointment. But Erod,
this is Erod's best year for K minus BB.
Yeah, Erod looks really good in the underlying numbers right now. And I think he just needs a change of scenery. He's a free agent at the end of the season. Probably not a guy that's going to cash in a big way with a huge multi-year deal, but you think about all the pitching needy teams out there that might want to take a chance on him at a relative discount. absolutely would love to see him go somewhere that's a little more pitcher friendly for a lefty, because I think that could go a long way.
End up in San Diego or something. San Francisco is going to be looking probably to spend a little bit on starting rotation. I mean, yeah, that would be a big change. The name that I like, and this is a little bit faith casting. Well, I got two names on here. I'm going to claim two. You can take somebody else. I'm taking Adbert Alzolay and Chris Paddock off this list. I just think they have good foundations. They have out pitches. They have enough command. They have enough velocity, and they have enough other pitches that they've thrown in their career that there's a path forward. You know what I mean? Like for me, Paddock going back to the cutter could be it, or even doing a Kevin Gossman where he just lives above the zone. He just lives above the plate and lives north-south and throws his changeup 50% of the time. You know, Paddock has a couple ways out of it, I think. Alzolay, he has a really good slider fastball. The slider fastball combo is pretty good and is good enough to get him a lot of strikeouts. I think he just needs to improve the cutter or the change. And I think those are there for him, possibly. So those two pitchers will be on some of my rosters next year.
Getting that third pitch working for Paddock has been a common refrain for him, really, since even when things were going well when he entered the league. I think people said, for this to work forever, he needs that third pitch. I think the hardest thing to figure out from afar, it's probably easier if you're around a team, you get to ask a lot of questions, you get to see what guys are working on. How can you tell how willing a pitcher is to change? Like, some of it's an individual's willingness to change, some of it's the organization and the game plan they give, but a lot of this can be on the individual player to go out and take the time to do some sort of off-season work with that pitch development to actually get to the point where they're going to throw a new pitch reliably in game situations when the next season rolls around.
There's a word for it. I mean, it's makeup, right? And it is the most impossible thing to scout. And that's why they'll ask writers before a trade, what do you think of this player? That's why scouts are always going to be important, because they're trying to judge makeup. It's also super problematic because judging makeup comes from sort of a, like, does your culture line up with mine? And I don't mean that in just raw, like, Latin American versus, I mean, like, your culture, that's also your work ethic, how you express your work ethic. There are guys that will just say, yes, boss, and not care, right? And then there'll be people that seem like they care too much, and they're tinkering, or they're angry, or they're not coachable, quote unquote. But then they're at Max Scherzer all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Because he's angry, and he's and maybe he probably told a pitching coach they didn't know what they were talking about at some point in his career. I bet you Max Scherzer said that to a pitching coach, before. But is he coachable? Hell yeah! Did you hear in his thing afterwards, after the game, he said he thanked all the coaches because adding pitches to his arsenal. That's something he's told me plenty of times. Adding pitches to his arsenal was so important that they really did a lot of the work. And so that's, I don't have an answer for you. The one thing I would say statistically is I always find it interesting. I find it interesting if they try, if you see it. You know what I mean? I find it interesting that Paddock threw a cutter a little bit. I find it interesting that he's been working really hard on that curveball, and you can see the curveball improve over time. I find it interesting that Adbert Alzolay has a cutter, has been kind of de-emphasizing the change, and there's been this cutter that's kind of snuck out, in the past few starts. Those things are interesting because they say those are kind of little markers, right? Little flashing markers. It's like, hey, this guy is trying something. Like Tarik Skubal, like, what? Did I mess up his name?
No, I mean, Tarik Skubal, but that's not why I was chuckling. It was a good transition.
Yeah. But, if you're looking for a sign that he is coachable or has that good makeup or is striving to make the most out of what he's got, you can just look at his pitch mix this year and see, oh, wow, he turfed the sinker, he turfed the split finger, added the sinker back in. He's trying everything he's got, and it's a little different than someone who, whose pitch mix is remarkably unchanged through some struggles.
Yeah, we had a question about Tarik Skubal from Nathan, and he just asked, how should we think about Tarik Skubal? He's consistently gotten Ks all year, and some of his peripherals seem pretty good, like K percentage and Sierra, while others seem alarming. He points to the barrel percentage and hard hit percentage, which definitely are a concern, and the suggestion was maybe it's a function of pitching up in the zone. I want to like him, but should I? And I think you still should like Tarik Skubal because of the reasons Eno's mentioning. This is not a guy who's just sitting there doing the same thing over and over again and getting the horrible home run rate result. I mean, 31 homers this season in like 130 innings is brutal. Clearly something has to change. But we just talked about a guy who has played his way into top pitcher on the board consideration, might win a Cy Young this year, who had a problem with a bad fastball, came back with a cutter, and obviously made a couple other changes too, but it's not like Skubal is without other weapons. I think he's got two good secondaries already between the slider and the changeup. So if he can fix the fastball problem, it could go a really long way toward changing what his 2022 looks like.
Yeah, nice soft landing too in Detroit with that park. That's always going to help a little bit. Surprising it hasn't helped so far on the home run rate. And I see, in Skubal, like, I think there's a little bit of an allegory for what's happening around the league and what we will see more of, which is people going back to the sinker, because there was, I think, this idea, and I think to some extent I was right. So Anthony Scafani, who was his pitching coach in Cincinnati? He's really good.
Brian Price was the manager.
No, but then
Derek Johnson.
Yeah, Derek Johnson. Derek Johnson kind of pointed out to DeSclafani, like, hey, you don't have a really good four-seamer, but no matter what, four-seamers get more whiffs high in the zone, right? So there was just this, like, hey, just pitch higher, philosophy that came around, and it's true to some extent, but I think Skubal's four-seamer is not good. And I think if you do the high four-seam approach, you should do it rarer. It should be like a secondary pitch. It should be like a low slider, like a thing you've set someone up for, and that you're going to in situations, and you're trying to stay high, or highest, because Skubal, you pointed this out to me, his fastball heat map has a lot of Broad Street on it, And so what my hope would be, if this works out for him, my hope would be that moving to the sinker allows him to stay out of that Broad Street, use the four-seamer less, and he doesn't have to do a full thing where he comes back with a whole new fastball. He kind of did that already with the sinker. So what I'm hoping is he emphasizes the sinker more and comes back, throws the slider in some counts sometimes to get strikes, throws the sinker, and uses the four-seamer more as a situational whiffs only high up in the zone kind of pitch. And that would be the best way forward for him. He could do a lot of what he's doing now with a 1.2 homers per nine next year. And that would be partially statistical regression and partially changes happening in front of us.
Yeah, kind of going back to what you're saying earlier, if Burnes or if Skubal, we'll use him as the current example, if you gave Skubal 139 more innings and said, do the same stuff you did this time, most likely he wouldn't give up 31 home runs again. He'd give up 25 or something, right? Like there's a better baseline than that. So, keep that in mind here as you're looking at a guy that could improve in both facets. You could get that rapid increase. The Ks are there, because the velo's good and the secondaries are good. And I almost wonder if there's also some deception in the delivery too with Skubal, where hitters just don't see him very well because he's piled up Ks everywhere. We talked about him in 2019. 179 Ks and 122 and 2/3 innings between high A and double A, just an alarming strikeout rate. And so far, that part of his game has translated about as well as you can expect. And I just think the fact that he's not sitting idly by is really encouraging. I also wonder what you think about, Chris Fetter as the pitching coach in Detroit. You look at Casey Mize, it's getting good results, but he's not missing a lot of bats. Like, is this an organization we trust to continue making the right adjustments to these young pitchers? They've got Mize with good results. They got Matt Manning, I think, in a pretty rough spot right now. Fixing Matt Manning looks like it might be a little more complicated than we would have thought just even a year ago.
But I think generally the amount of change that we've seen Mize and Skubal undergo at the major league level speaks well of Fetter's abilities. So I think we're, yeah, and hopefully it's not just like cookie cutter. That was one complaint I've heard from pitchers in the past, which is like, I hate pitching coaches. They only have one idea. There were definitely old school pitching coaches that just had one idea, like throw the cutter more, throw the sinker more, and I think the work with Mize and Skubal has been different enough that I could say, hey, I think because Mize actually kind of improved his four seam and went away from the sinker, right?
Yeah, and I think Mize, the strange thing about him is like he's not throwing his best pitch as much as we expected him to.
I would guess the split finger. I'm not looking at it right now.
The splitter is, I believe, by far like his best pitch from a scouting perspective. I haven't looked at the actual results on it recently, but that was one of the puzzling things about him when I last looked at him. Is like, oh, he's not leaning on that pitch nearly as much as I would have thought.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he's good. I think that if you had three even really quality high people, I don't think realize this, that if you had three really high quality, three top 30 prospect starting pitchers like they had, right? You'd expect one to work out really well, one to maybe be a back end starter, and one to be a reliever. So like we can't just say, oh, he didn't fix Matt Manning too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, with Mize, I think there's a little bit of a command issue. I think the stuff is there, so I'm betting on Mize next year. I think he'll be better next year. He has by the stuff model, he has 3 above average pitches by stuff. It just doesn't have any that are above average by location. So I think he could really take another step forward with, and it might not be that surprising, right? Like he just changed his pitch mix a lot. Maybe he's just not as comfortable with this new pitch mix in terms of the locations he needs to put these pitches. He could take a real step forward the second year. And the model, for what it's worth about Skubal, it says, it's not really impressed with the stuff. However, a lot of that is the four seam, which does not have good ride, and does not have good wiggle. And is only average velocity right now. 94 is average velocity. So the four seam is not good. If he throws that four seam less, his stuff number will go up. So I think in Skubal and Mize, I see enough that I will have them in my top 75 probably, or at least top 80, top 90. They will definitely be my top 100, and they will be on my teams.
Yeah, I could see both in my top 75 if I had to guess how that list is going to shape up. Maybe
back end kind of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But those are really interesting pitchers. I love the pitchers that I rank from like 70 to 80. I love those pitchers because they're so cheap. And by me putting them there, I've seen something that like I think will take off. I think that my teams are littered with guys from that ranking every year, and since they didn't cost anything on draft day, they're expendable in terms of your roster, and you don't have to stick around too long to find out.
Yeah, you can be a little patient with them to bench them a little bit, kind of wait and see what happens to the first couple weeks of the season if things aren't going well initially too at that price. Thanks a lot for that question about Tarik Skubal, Nathan. A couple more questions to get to on this episode. We got one from Russell, and he's a question about defensive metrics. If he was going to put one defensive stat on his Fangraphs dashboard as a shorthand for this guy plays good or bad defense, what would that be?
I don't think you can do it on Fangraphs. I think my favorite stat is outs above average. I just the fact that it comes with starting position for the fielders, I think puts it way ahead of every other metric. And I know there's been some disagreement about how these things have tested, and has outs above average been better for outfielders or infielders? I don't know, man. I just think if you're starting with better data to begin with, and I can't really see an argument that you're going to get better results without starting position. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's always going to be better if you know where the fielder started, because you're able to separate more things out. What was the first step? What was this? What was positioning? What was the coaching? You know what I mean? If you don't have where the fielder started, you're just guessing on half the stuff.
Yeah, I think outs above average is where I look first, and then I never look at that and go, oh, that means he's a great defender. That means he's a terrible defender. But it's a really good start into that conversation. If you look at the leaderboard right now, outs above average across all positions. Nick Ahmed, yeah, great defender at shortstop. Nicky Lopez, Francisco Lindor, Matt Chapman, it's platinum glove winning third baseman right there. Michael Taylor, Andrelton Simmons, Harrison Bader, like that seems dead on across the board. Ryan McMahon does well there. I was thinking about defensive run saves maybe as a possible dashboard option. I'm just trying to remember if you can actually put that onto your dashboard. You can put almost everything on a Fangraphs.
I think you can put, DRS should be, because it's one of their stats. You could put DRS on. There's defensive value, which is basically the defensive component of WAR.
Mm-hmm.
And that is kind of cool because it's all encompassing and includes framing. So guess who's the top four? Sean Murphy, Real Muto, Omar Narvaez, and Jacob Stallings are the top four fielders in baseball according to that metric.
Yeah.
I don't know about the sniff test on this one.
Well, I don't think there's anything. The second part of the question was about whether any of these metrics are indexed like WRC plus, or if they just count like defensive run saves is just a straight count. You're positive or negative.
They're almost all outs above average. Is a bit of a component of average in there, right?
Yeah. But for the most part, it's just a straight like this is it. This is the value.
How about the rest of it? Let's do non-catchers. Michael A. Taylor, Trevor Story, Nicky Lopez, Matt Chapman, Miguel Rojas, Kevin Newman.
Ryan McMahon's pretty high up in there too. Jackie Bradley Jr. I mean, yeah, it's.
Wait, that's DRS or what?
No, that's the. I was on
defensive value.
Oh, yeah, I was on defensive value. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, okay. Really, I'm not seeing that. Are you doing? You're not doing qualified? You do less?
I'm on 0 for minimum plate appearances.
Okay.
That's probably cutting it too thin. You got to go like 100.
Okay, yeah, I did 200, and now Bader is sneaking on, but tons of catchers. I don't know. It's tough for me to say that Omar Narvaez has more defensive value than Trevor Story or Matt Chapman.
I mean, I think it's more just a flag of, will this guy get a lot of playing time if he's not hitting? Will this guy lose playing time if he's not hitting? I think that's more or less what we're trying to have. And I think,
and if that's true,
does that?
I think that's probably then if that's the aim, then I think actually defensive value does it better than anything else, right? Because these guys are all playing. And they're playing partially because of their defensive value. Like Jacob Stallings is playing because of his defensive value. And if you were worried, that some other part of his profile was crappy and you saw that he was good at defensive value, the problem is it's also just accounting stats. So you have to look over and you have to know 15 is good, right? Mm-hmm. But I do have one way that this might become more intuitive. That's the defensive value of WAR, right? So if you divide it by 10, that's how many wins they get just off of defense. So that can actually make it more intuitive, right? So now I'm looking at Sean Murphy, and it says his defensive value is 19.4. That means he's getting 2 wins off of defense. He's going to stay in, right? They're going to play him. And I think it's also good because if you look at Miles Straw, it says, okay, 3 DRS. What the hell does that mean? I don't know what that means. If I just have a 3 over there in the DRS column next to all these offensive stats, like that wouldn't be meaningful to me. However, 8.2 defensive value means he's worth a win, basically on defense. That will make me look past whatever WRC plus. It's something I'm struggling with because, Alex Chamberlain's talking about Miles Straw and he's like, this is a win for people. Miles Straw is a win. And I think he pointed out Nicky Lopez and some other, and, some part of me is like, ew, why are you touting these terrible hitters? You know, and I have to find some sort of good process to behind this to find these guys. And so I think, yes, defensive value is a way to find the Miles Straws of the world. And probably the difference between Miles Straw and Oscar Mercado has a good deal to do with defense. Maybe.
Yeah, Straw grades out as a good defender. I think he was on the first page of the leaderboard.
And Mercado was already starting to play left and right when he came up at times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, defensive value could be good. I think maybe just throw in it's DEF in the as a stat in on Fangraphs. You could throw that up on your dashboard and have like one sort of number to look at. Just remember, divide by 10, and that's how many wins.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question, Russell. I mean, it matters because playing time can be lost or gained as a result of being a good or bad defender. One more question here to get to from David. And he writes, did Eno yell balk during Jake Cousins' motion with the rest of the Oracle Park crowd at the Tuesday Brewers-Giants game? No way DVR did. That leads to my question. Is there anything to a funky motion, not really an arm slot, that contributes to a pitcher's stuff? And how do y'all feel about balks in general? So we'll take the first part of that question. Is there anything to a funky motion that contributes to a pitcher's stuff?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Joe Ryan does not look that good in the Pitching Plus model, I'll tell you that. But one of the things he does is he leads with the elbow. And if you're watching on YouTube, Yusmeiro Petit does this. So when the ball's coming out, basically the hitter sees elbow, and then it pops up at the last minute. That's how he releases the ball. So he comes out elbow pointed and forearm back, and then he pops up. And that means that they can't pick up the release point. That's why I have Yusmeiro Petit as a note of caution for Joe Ryan, which is that Joe Ryan is doing excellent his first run through. I think as people start to pick up that release point, he may not have as much success. And so he may end up as a kind of Yusmeiro Petit, because I think when you have a lot of funk like that, you're more likely to end up as a reliever, because people will, by the third time if they pick up on that, whatever funk you have, and can see through it or just start to understand it, I can't look at the elbow, I have to look at the spot, and it'll just show up in the spot, and I know where to look now. Once you start doing that, you can hit him. And so Yusmeiro Petit's third time through the order penalties are off the charts, because his stuff is kind of mediocre, but the first time you see it, you're like, oh, God damn, that elbow thing again. And then the more times you see it, the more times you do better. The people who face Yusmeiro Petit the most have had the most success against him. And I know that's batter versus pitcher data, so I'm not basing my whole argument on that, but I'm just saying it makes sense to me that you could have funk that would be better in 1 or 2 plate appearances that might go away. The funk factor would go away in the 3rd or 4th appearance against the pitcher in the same game. So it is hard to. I've seen various approaches. One approach that was pretty cool was somebody that was working within one of these independent labs was able to put a number on how long you could see the ball from home plate before it was released. So it's basically like how many contiguous seconds from you could see the wide of the ball before it was released. And he was using that as a deception number, which I thought was pretty interesting. If I had the capabilities to do that, I would study that, because I do think there's something to that. Some guys, hide the ball all the way up, like they pick it up behind their body. That's Giolito started doing that. And then there's other guys who just show the ball. There's a guy, Nate Jones or something. It's got the most ridiculous delivery. He just takes the ball up, and you can see the ball the whole way. It only works because he throws like 99.
Yeah, and it moves a ton when he throws sliders too.
Yeah, but it is weird. He's showing the ball the whole time. So anyway, yeah, I do think funk matters. I think it's a little bit more of a reliever skill, because I think its value goes away over time, and then you have to rely on actually having some stuff.
You know who actually had a pretty nice career, even though it was a pretty short career? It was Josh Colmenter, and he was like straight over the top. I remember reading a story about him when he broke in with the D-backs in 2011, and he had this axe throwing background.
Mhm.
Like before it was a
Yeah.
cool bar game, like actually throwing axes.
And then he threw his pitches like axes.
Yeah, I mean, it was like as over the top as any pitcher I think I've ever seen. And 3.38 ERA, 107 WHIP the first year. He had a sub 4 ERA every single year until his last year in the big leagues.
But there's a lot to that. There's a couple, like one thing that was really cool was he threw from such an over the top thing that his curveball had change up movement. He had what you call a reverse curveball, basically.
Just like
so,
drop.
it almost looked like a screwball, right? Because it was a curveball coming from a righty, but he's righty, right? Yeah. So he's so extreme over the top that it's like a curveball coming from a lefty.
Like extreme overpronation.
Yeah, and so that was interesting. He also, though, I think had a fair amount of injury, and also ended up in the pen and like in between, being kind of a three. I think in today's game, if he came up, he'd be somebody's 3-inning guy.
Oh, he'd be the Rays, like he'd be another Jalen Beeks type.
Yeah, he'd be on the Rays, and he'd be throwing that curveball 50% of the time, and he'd pitch in three to 4 inning occurrences, like either before, after a follower, or in the middle of the game. So I do think that it helped his career, but it ultimately wasn't enough to make it even bigger of a career, if that makes any sense.
By the way, I think for the first question, did Eno yell balk during Jake Cousins' motion with the rest of Oracle Park? No, only because Jake Cousins wasn't pitching for Arizona against Stanford, 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So
when I used to yell things like that,
you're in your post heckling era. So
also, I have to tell you, I've read the rule book. I don't think I could really explain the balk rule. Like I'm just like, yeah. I have two thoughts. Either there are crap ton more balks than are ever called, or there are no balks. So I don't know which. It's one of those two. But I think every time a balk is called, everyone's like, "What happened?"
Yeah, was that? And then they slow it down and they zoom in. I'm like, there's one that was a pitcher's hand like wiggled. And it was
or
what?
like he like opened his thigh a little bit, and it's like, no, what? That was a balk. I remember the balk got called recently. The guy the umpire comes running from third base, going like this. He's just moving his hands.
Is that supposed to be the signal? It's supposed to be like a milking a cow signal.
I don't know, but then they did
moved when he was supposed to be set.
Yeah, he was trying to say the hands moved, but like when they slowed it down, it was like the hands moved like a half an inch, and I was just like, wow.
It wasn't anything that
false precision, if you ask me.
Well, and I do feel like it's kind of like the old obscenity threshold test. Potter Stewart. I know what you see it.
No, but I don't trust that. I don't trust
umpires. That's how umpires apply it. They know it when they see it. When they call it, I'm like, nope, sorry. I think balks are mostly ridiculous.
I think, I don't think that they. I think they could be cleaned up, is another way of saying it. Like maybe more well-defined and actually enforced. I mean, there's something weird about them that like, here's this super technical, kind of hard to understand part of baseball that never really gets called. And then when it does get called, it can be hugely important. I think in this game, it was like the 9th inning. The guy went from second to third. It's like, what? Because his hand jiggled a little?
I think we're talking about the same play. I couldn't believe that was a call. It seemed totally ridiculous.
Yeah, what was that? Was it a Diamondbacks game?
It was like a week ago. It wasn't that long ago.
I was just like, I don't. Okay, if you say so. That's that's my motto for balks. If you say so.
Yeah, I can't really fight.
Like if you're gonna tell me I know exactly what a balk is and they're called exactly right and as much as they should be, I would say, if you say so.
Sure, why not? Yeah, I think cleaning up the rule would probably be step one towards helping everybody understand it.
They are doing some work in the space, I would say, in that they are testing out new rules for lefties, the lefty pickoff move in the minor leagues. Which I think that's the most ridiculous. If you know what a balk is, tell me that you know exactly where that 45-degree line is to home plate, between home plate and first base, that where the lefty can like hover in space over that and pretend he's going home, but not cross the 45-degree line and throw it over to home. They're gonna try and get rid of that.
Yeah,
I think it's like any move home is the beginning of the delivery.
I think most of Chris Capuano's pickoffs were balks.
Is he the one? There's some guys who
just amazing pickoff move.
Like the leg is just hovering in the air, like.
Yeah, worked to my benefit as a fan, but very skeptical that really isn't a balk by most interpretations of the rules. We are going to go. Before we go, we got a special offer on subscriptions still running right now. 50% off at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Be sure to get in the door. We got playoff coverage coming up.
Special reward for anybody listening this far into the podcast. Shoot me an email.
Ooh.
To my name, esaris@theathletic.com. And in the subject, describe what you're seeing on YouTube. And I will send you one.
Very nice.
Boom.
All the incentive in the world to do that, but 50% off a subscription at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. If you don't have one of those already, on Twitter, he is at Eno Saris. I'm at Derek Van Riper. You can always drop us an email, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. That is going to wrap things up for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.